Let's go. Yeah, I can do a little bit of intro. My name is Joe, and I've recently become Australian, so I started G'day. But I am Colombian through and through, born and bred in Colombia, and I'll talk a little bit about all the places I've been to, but also how that has informed yeah, my practice in a way. I was ECD at a design company called For the People. My husband was one of the founders, and I was one of the founding members. I'll start this. So yes, so I was part of the company until June. I left the company, moved to LA. And yeah, it's kind of a big part of who I am. I'll talk a lot about place branding in this presentation, but to give you a bit more context, this is me, a fabulous picture of me in Colombia. My dad used to work in a mining town, and not any mining town, but the biggest open coal mining town there is in the world. So right from the get-go, I think I knew as soon as I left Colombia the enormous privilege I have in being protected from what it was Colombia back then going. As you may all know, we'll talk about that, what Colombia looked like back then, but I was very protected in our little bubble here. But secondly, I'm just like a almost like a direct consequence of fossil fuel privilege, really. It's the only reason why I left the country. It's the only reason why I am where I am, where I studied, etc. And I've come to terms with that. Taken me a long time to come to terms with that privilege coming from where it came from. And yeah, and also informed me a lot of especially on the West Coast, which is one of the projects that I'll talk about, informed me about being able to understand that the world isn't as black and white, but there's a lot of gray area. So yes, that's, I will never show this picture again. I've said that, and yeah, here I am showing it to strangers. I apologize. This is a more accurate picture of what Colombia was when I was growing up, and it is. I kind of posted it because this is what people see, or how people saw me the moment I landed in France. So I left Colombia when I was 16, and I studied design in Paris. But I never really saw any of this. You know, for me, I was Colombian. I was, as I said, privileged. My cousins didn't have access to the things I had access to. Um, and coming out of the country and be being seen just as a one story note. It didn't matter that I spoke three languages. It didn't matter that I had declined a scholarship for a genetical engineering degree to study design. It didn't matter any of those things. People just would see me for a Colombian, and that implied a lot of the images that we see here. And these stereotypes take years to dismantle, and I don't think they have been dismantled yet. And I think one of the more interesting things that I've discovered through place branding as well is the come of the fear or the danger of one single story, right? Because the story that you see on this page is the story of the immigrant Colombian, is the story of the poor Colombian, is the story of the criminal Colombian. And it affects an entire nation just like that. It erases any type of um, yeah, any other story. And I am now thankful for Encanto and Carlos Vives and Shakira and all of these Garcia Marquez and all of these other artists that have managed to weave in a different narrative than what it is portrayed here. Just to get a little context of maybe perhaps why I'm so attached to place branding. um, it is place branding when we started working on the first few projects, it has always been, the two names probably that get given are placemaking and place branding. And it's always, first of all, it's always irked me a little bit how none of them feel quite right. Placemaking, for starters, feels like like I don't know, it just feels too pretentious. Like a project will never make a place. The place is made every day, so it just feels like a little bit pretentious. And place branding on the other side just feels very transactional. It's almost like the commercial, and sure there are commercial impacts, commercial benefits to a project, the place branding project, but it is much deeper than that. So I don't know. I've yet to come up with a new term, but let's just talk about it as place branding today. So this is the west coast of Tasmania. Back in 2015, we were asked to participate on the bid for a place branding project for this region. So let me kind of put Tassie first in a map. So Australia, pretty big. Then the south of maybe like a 2-hour flight from Sydney, there's an island called Tasmania, also pretty big. And in the west of that is, it's this region. Half of it is it's a national park. Maybe at the top there is one of the oldest trees, the Tarkine forest, oldest trees in the world. But they're not protected. And then somehow in the middle, there's a few towns, 5 in total, that make up the kind of region of the West Coast. It's very spread out. And once upon a time, that region was very wealthy, especially because of mining. Right now, so you see this picture, which I absolutely love, shows you how these forests, I don't know if you see them in detail, but these are all meant to be, like kind of like what you see here in the bottom, very beautiful pine trees. And they have all been not only destroyed for timber, but the mining that took place in that area for so long has just basically destroyed the land. You can see it, it is so obvious. Some of these mountains look like Mars when you walk on them. Like they're red and there's nothing that will grow there. And it will take a lot of time and money to recover and restore. But anyhow, this is a backdrop of that brief. It was like, we are struggling. We're not attracting tourists, of course. So there's that kind of tourism component to the brief. But most importantly, we're not keeping locals. We're losing population. There's only one mine open left, and it's about to close in a few years. So even the people that come here have, those type of workers that like work 4 days and then take 5 days off, etc. So they're not really, the kids don't go to schools in the West Coast. They're not really kind of part of the population. And yeah, and they are even mocked by the same people in Tasmania mock the West Coast just for many reasons. So they're remote. The closest town is a 5-hour drive, and they thought they didn't have anything going for them. I'd probably say kudos to the council members, government body, saying, I think we need a brand and that will help us. Of course, we'd never done a place branding job in our lives. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. And we had references. The references weren't kind of exactly what they helped to get us to the answer, but they weren't necessarily tackling the same problem. So I love New York, of course, the ultimate place branding icon. But I would probably argue that New York didn't have a identity problem, right? This is a beautiful mark, but it doesn't go deeper, not because it doesn't, just because it doesn't need to. And with the West Coast, well, the problem goes quite deep. So this is a good kind of starting point, and reading a lot about how this came about and the process was helpful. But I think looking a little bit to other things that weren't necessarily brands. So Keep Austin Weird is a kind of the motto or the tagline for Austin. And how this came to be was very grassroots. I think it was like a librarian, a local librarian that wanted to keep quirky local shops open. And he came up with this line, Keep Austin Weird, that now is an official tagline of Austin. And we loved how the grassroots approach to to a place came about. And if we were thinking, is it possible to be able to replicate this in a way? And the final one is Keep Tassie Wild. This was happening at the same time as our project. So funny enough, the creatives behind Keep Tassie Wild and For the People were constantly communicating. Keep Tassie Wild is a non-for-profit in Tasmania that seeks to get funds and protect things like the tarkine and a lot of the fauna and flora that are local native species. So that was cool to see these people now have built something quite incredible, but it was cool to be part or have that conversation when we were also starting. So those were our main three inspirations for the West Coast. But really, this is like what you see here is the process that it took us to get to the right answer. So the thing with place branding is that you really need to tap into, we're strangers, we're others, we don't know the region. And as much as you embed yourself in the place and befriend people, it's really the locals that have the answers, right? So we went above and beyond to meet as many, to find the tensions, to bring out those stories. And I'll be honest, some of these conversations I wasn't really prepared for. Like, I have a degree in design and don't have any I don't know, I don't think I was ill-equipped to handle a lot of these conversations that are based in trauma, that are based in intergenerational suffering, that we talk with people that sit in the complete opposite of your political spectrum, that have completely different both political or religious views than you, and be able to listen and pass no judgment it was very hard. It was very hard for us, for the team, and I don't know, it requires it's like I shedded a few skins through the process of place branding since, but it was a steep learning curve for us because we came in with an approach of, similar to any other brand. It's like, okay, we'll do some research and we'll do some interviews. You hear the interviews are exponentially harder because you need to make sure you're listening to not only the 5 different towns, but different like socioeconomic backgrounds, different political beliefs and religion, different age. And yeah, it was tough, but I would probably say is the most rewarding part of a place branding project once you get to do that. Once you get to like lock in some of kind of some of the aha moments for us. And for the West Coast, it was a firm belief that all of these people, they call themselves, they're West Coasters, and they had this thing called West Coast tough. And it means that if you really want to live in a region that's been formed by all of this mining and pretty dark history, if you go even further back, you get a special type of resilience, a special type of dark humor, and they're very proud of that. And all of the things that we had heard were kind of initial problems, like, oh, we don't get really good Wi-Fi, or it's always raining. We were tapping into those things as like, actually, that's who you are. That's what makes the West Coast the West Coast. And we're not going to sell the West Coast. Come here for, you want to provide the most honest view of the region. Yeah. So these, yeah, there's some of the things that they told us as well. I think it was actually really helpful that we weren't part of the government. We didn't have any political agendas. And yeah, and they trusted us with a lot of information. I think also the fact that I was Colombian played, and that most of my team was, English, or just not necessarily Australian, was was an asset. And typically in praise branding, that isn't. You think you need people from your town to figure it out with you, but I think because of that, I think there's an important asset for us. And the truth is here, when you discover all of these stories and tensions, you're really bringing hard truths to the surface, and you're replaying this back to local government. And there's some pretty hard truths in there that, typically people don't want to hear. So I don't know. I thought all of this was a first for me, like designing, trained as a graphic designer, and all of a sudden, having deep conversations about, I would probably say with very strong emotions. No, it changed something in me. We had to adapt to change the process. We couldn't just do Zoom calls with some of the elders or some of the young people. So here on the left, you have an example of a famous American artist called Candy Chang. We borrowed a lot of her approach to it's almost like, I would call it guerrilla research. This is by all means not a quantity, a kind of a qual quant approach. We just want to hear what makes this place special. And and we do these stickers or leave postcards in cafes, libraries. We do endless town hall meetings. We partnered with local schools to have the teachers help us with drawings and the kids to understand what it was. We went to many bars because that's where you get the good goss. So at the end, this is something, we did a newspaper to almost gather all of our thoughts on what people were telling us. But truly, once we had that kind of grasp of language and humor, once we understood what made West Coast so incredible, why people would not leave, even though, conditions were probably dire, everything else clicked, all the graphic elements and all the tone of voice, and the use of photography, and all of that clicked shortly after. So We, again, part of the process, I'd probably say once you go through the research and we present our thoughts that are kind of quite, yeah, probably say hard for government to listen to. Um, we then present 2 rounds, but the 2 rounds aren't presented entirely to the council. Yes, the council has a say. Yes, they're the ones that hired us. But in order for a project like this to be really successful, you need the buy-in of the community. And that's not only because of that's just how it is. The two, the people in government that are empowered today will not be empowered tomorrow, right? They have a longevity of 4 years at best, unless they get, re-elected. They also serve, they're public servants, so they serve the community. So in a way, they're probably, yes, the people that hired us, the people that will pay us, but they're doing so with public funded money. And in order for the project to be long lasting, it needs to supersede the people that are in power today. Right. So that's a reality that we've learned throughout the years with doing place branding. That means that your shareholders, stakeholders, the people that really matter are the community. And in doing so, you have to we presented both concepts, both territories in a very, call it brand exhibition that we did in all the 5 towns. And there we get feedback like the ones on the left. Those were the names of our 2 concepts. And yeah, and you get feedback and then you present back again. So it's I'd probably say an arduous but necessary process, because you're not trying to present at them, you're trying to create with them. And I mean, that significantly changed the way we tackle a normal commercial corporate brand to the way we tackle place brand. And I'd probably say one of these exhibitions, so we're there, we host Q&As at the end at lunch to accommodate for people having a break, and at the end post work. So they'd come, yeah, either at 12 or at 5. And sometimes it comes through the day. The entire exhibition's is open throughout the day. I remember once in Zion, one of the north towns in the north. We were just there, and this woman comes in and she just like walks in, reads everything, and then just looks at us and says, "Nope," and just walks off. Like, okay, like you will have that, and we as designers are so used to criticism and yeah, and getting our work gets better because of it. But when you are when you're working for a community, it's just wild. It's very crazy, but it's also very rewarding. Get to that in a little while. So there a little bit more about behind the scenes. This is what got us inspired in terms of now the graphic elements. As I said, the West Coast was very successful, so it has a lot of incredible signage that still stands today. And those were the inspirations for all of these badges that we came up with. Each town had their own set of colors and they had their own set of saying. Tasmania was called Van Diemen Land before. It was called Tasmania. And yeah, so a lot of this is kind of directly inspired from the that we were seeing on the streets. However, if we wanted this to be very successful or implemented by many, we had to open source the entire creation. So with our friends from Sons & Co. in New Zealand, they created this generator that sits on the website of the West Coast of Tassie for any business to go and do what they called like a badge. And we also did all the sets of illustrations with an illustrator friend called Marco Palmieri. We developed a font called Sidetrack, and it was inspired by the train tracks on the West Coast, which were one of the first of Tassie. There's 7 versions of the typeface, and that's again all free for anyone. Any local has access to any of these components. Yeah, just signing in. And what was, I'd probably say, the most rewarding thing for me. Oh, yes. And we've done 2 photo shoots. This was the winter photo shoot. I was pregnant, heavily pregnant, so I couldn't go. I went to the summer one. But my husband still says that this is like the 10 best days of his entire career. It's like, it was incredible 10 days of freezing cold with best mates. Yeah, just shooting the West Coast. And as you can see, the West Coast is stunning. So it is not for everyone, but for those that want to, I don't know, that seek a bit of adventure, that want a bit of left of center, that are willing to kind of be themselves, the West Coast is for them. This slide shows what the community has been up to since. So we've had a very long relationship with the West Coast. We'd go back every year since the brand launched, just to help them out. And by helping them out, I mean, some people's requests were as simple as, I don't know how to install the typeface on my very old vintage Windows, to I am launching, a business and I'd like to use some of the elements, but I'm not sure about my strategy, my approach. That we would be almost like consultants to small businesses in the area to implement this. And I love this, going back and seeing just the brand being used by many people. There was one that I don't know if it made it to this, but there is a like it's almost like the Ocean Beach trail parking. It's like that simple one. There is a volunteer lady in a museum, and she didn't know how to use a computer. So what she did was she printed out all of the icons and the letters themselves, and she would do posters old school by kind of cutting them out and photocopying them. So you would get these wild posters that were, a little bit off, but just perfect. And she was very apologetic. She was like, I think I'm kind of like, not using the brand correctly. I'm like, it's your brand, you're using it however you want, and this is beautiful. So yeah, this is just kind of a piece of the the community kind of coming together and using the West Coast brand elements as they use today. We also had a brand video launch that came along with the movie. We had 2, but as I said, I didn't trust the internet, so I'm not sharing that with you, but I can share the link afterwards if you'd like to see it. Another project that I wanted to talk about is Derwent Valley, also in Tasmania. So it seems that once we got that West Coast project, we got a lot of projects from place branding, and a lot were actually in Tasmania, which was harder because it's like when you define one region, you define what makes them differently. Then you go to the region that sits next to it, and you're like, oh, well, what makes you different to this one? You're in the same island, basically the same people. But so we really struggled at the beginning on the finding all the research with the Derwent Valley because it was just perfect, as opposed to the West Coast. Derwent Valley it was lush, it had great weather, it has great food. They have the biggest platypus, they have the purest waters, all of these incredible things that the locals would tell us. Like they have the most expensive cherries in the world that they export, mainly to China. They like those remote areas are so dark that it's able to be, it's called like dark skies, and people fly in there to see all sorts of things, but you can easily spot UFOs, is what they claim to say. And we would keep on hearing this and like, this is great, but like this attention now. Our neighbor in Tassie is a platypus expert, And what was funny was that when we asked him if platypus grew bigger in the Derwent Valley, he was like, no, they do not grow bigger. Those are they're just exaggerating. And same with every single one of these. It's like they are in a way a little bit exaggerated, and that's kind of what makes them. It's like they are Derwent Valley truths. And once we understood that, it's like, oh, okay, it's not, they're not lies. And as I said on the first West Coast project, the last thing you want to do is build a narrative that's not authentic. As well, when we were working on the Derwent Valley, with all the fake news and misinformation that was happening, we really did not want to get ourselves into a pickle by saying things that aren't true. But these were not true. These were, everyone firmly believed this. There's a bit of magic, realism happening in what the narratives that we're saying. So we embrace that, and we're like, okay, these are the Derwent Valley truths, right? And these are some of the imagery that went with kind of leaning into literature as the hook to tell these narratives and stories. We had developed a lot of characters like the thylacine, which is the Tasmanian tiger, the Fagus, the cherries, all of these stories, and kind of came to life through the brand. Things like where myth is legend and legend is fact. It's unbelievable is in our nature. So we really kind of dialed up that narrative. Yeah, the true-ish tales of the Derwent Valley. What was you could see them coming together if the internet lets me. No, come on. There you go. There you go. Yeah, so we worked with the Ilana, incredible illustrator, to help us with these covers. And all of these narratives, the hops that fed the nation, apparently every beer that's in Australia has hops that come from the Derwent Valley. The black swans are also, renowned for being so beautiful. They inspired an opera. So all of these things that we kept on hearing made it to the brand in some shape or form. To the point that then we took this to actually invite not locals, invite tourists or visitors to discover the place a bit more. So, fishing guide became the secrets to catching trout by the wheelbarrow, because it was they said that if you wanted a beginner person that's learning how to fish for the first time, the best place to take them is the Derwent Valley, because there's so much fish that they will inevitably catch one. So the fishing guide was kind of part of that. The trail guide, they also claim that the last Tasmanian tiger was seen in the Derwent Valley, and that the Tassie tiger is alive and it's roaming around in the Derwent Valley. So that's kind of part of the trail guide. And the dark skies, as I said before, it's like the appeal there is that it is so dark you can spot UFOs. So these things made it to some of the guides for the for visitors. I love the water one because it's still water, but it is so pure. So like we kind of dialed up the whole narrative. The writers had so much fun with inventing these. None of these really came from us. They were all from listening to the community, and what we did was tie it all together through a beautiful narrative. So yeah, all of these kind of characters happened, but then of course the Derwent Valley Council launched their brand without really giving us a heads up, and they didn't really launch it. I wouldn't probably say properly. It's their brand. They can launch it however they want, but they just changed the footer on their email signature And the press got into that. And as I said before, the press always, when there's a big kind of place branding job, they will always be interested because it's public funded. So in a way, they have the right to be interested, and people have the right to know, right? Unfortunately, for us designers, they don't come with, it's often the headline is like, $1 million for a logo, and completely erase anything of research or any strategy that was done. This was not a $1 million project, but it was immediately, like as it says here, tiger logo poo-pooed. And as I said before, we're quite accustomed to being criticized, but when you open the newspaper and you read this, especially the ones I highlighted, it says, I feel bad for criticizing. However, this tiger looks like it's been doing a poo for about 100 years. I love it. Like someone thinks yeah, it's almost like we're used to, I don't know, the brand new comments, and I guess it's inevitable, when you launch that, but it hits a different tone when it's a community that you've worked so hard to know, that that response like this, and I guess you'll never have 100% love, but yeah, I remember being this. I'm like, I'm used to my work being criticized, but this is just, yeah, I couldn't help but smile as well. Looks a lot like an Egyptian hieroglyph. My 5-year-old would draw, of course. And is this a marketing ploy to get people talking about it, like the whole ice snack 2.0? So yeah, once the brand was properly launched as well, that the elements were given to the community, then the narrative changed. But this was inevitably the first thing that came about. Since then, we've done a lot of place branding jobs. I think for the people, sorry, for the people's reputation started becoming stronger. We started also becoming a bit better in our process. As I said, the West Coast was our first one. Really didn't know what we were doing. But yeah, after probably 6 or 7, we got better at just making it work for us, making sure that everyone in the community was also listened to, and not only the initial stakeholders. We made sure that, for instance, any Indigenous communities were on the table right from the get-go. That was something we learned the hard way. But anyhow, a lot of beautiful work and work I'm very proud of came from only the place branding arm at For the People. And I always wondered, in all my kind of years of experience doing place branding, I've always had to do like neighborhoods or precincts or regions, but I never really have had the challenge to brand a nation. And I don't know if For the People's approach would work for a nation, simply because think about it, like a nation is an imaginary boundary, right? But it is a real boundary in that, if even in the smallest nations in the world, I don't know, think about like a Luxembourg or the Vatican, I don't know, you will most likely never meet ever every member of that nation, every other citizen of that country, even if it's the smallest one. Yet, if I ask you to think about an Englishman in their 20s, I think you can imagine what that could look like. If someone says, Joe, there was a Colombian, I'm already seeing her. I can smell her. And that's the power of like imagination in a collective, as as invented as the term nation. And I'm talking about this because when you have to brand a nation, think about like these are the official and non-official kind of graphic elements that make Australia yeah, Australian national symbols, officially and non-officially. And you think about these, and you think about everything I said before about um, the press being kind of quite close to a place branding project. If it's a nation, that would be tenfold. Taxpayers will also be paying attention because it's their money. They will see little benefit from a branding project if it's not told properly. So when you get to things like these, they're they really like select themselves right from the get-go because they're harmless. You know, they don't divide people. No one's gonna say no to a kangaroo. You know, it's quite cute. So that's why a lot of our kind of national symbols end up being native animals or native plants or stars, really, because it's almost like it's a superficial but risk averse way to combine a nation. And I say that, and when I was putting this presentation together, you can see here that there's the one that stands out a little bit, you know, the odd one out, and that's the red passing lion, right? There is no lion in Australia. I'm like, and the lion there is clearly a post-colonial link back to England, and in a way, then looking at one of our clients, the City of Sydney, the anchor is the logo that represents the City of Sydney. And we had a huge discussion inside for the people because the anchor is, you know, meant to represent the port when the first boats arrived. But you know who doesn't think that represents them? The Eora people. They were there before that boat arrived. So in a way, these graphic elements that we probably never really had a look at and never really thought about, Colombian national elements, they tell a deeper story, and a story that I'm now putting more attention to, of imperialism and colonialism. But more sadly, I don't think uh, they don't depict the community they're meant to represent. They don't represent us all in a way. Now I'm in the States. I moved 7, 8 months ago. And this thing of identity and belonging has just really hit home. I moved to LA, which is kind of population is 51% Latino. So I feel like a lot of this feeling like an other, feeling called clearly an alien resident, but feeling like an alien. I don't know. I hadn't felt like that in a long time. My first time that I moved to France, and I was kind of told that single story, I had found myself moved out of that, and here I am back again, you know, into this position. And the and the fear of the other is real, is it's a real thing, and especially more so here in the States. And I think what fascinates me about place branding is that we need to trust the other, not only the company you're working with, but trust that every other person that lives in that place um, has picked that place for a reason. And you need to weave in elements of empathy, and you need to, you know, place branding in a whole is about being able to tell that pluralistic story of many, many people that are bounded by something more than geography. I feel like in the conversations that are happening today in the world is probably one of the best tools or best learnings I've had in the last few years in with design. Because this is also so true. The opposite of otherness is sameness, you know. And who wants a world like that? Who wants a world of sameness? That's it. Thank you.
Ask if anyone has any questions off the bat.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just absolutely loved hearing you talk through that whole process, and particularly the first one as well, is really actually quite moving, I think. So I'm going to come in with quite a boring question, actually. I'm curious to know, like, how did West Tasmania sort of like, I suppose, what impact did the work have in a way? So I imagine it probably gave the community the stronger sense of like identity and connection, which is obviously huge. But did it help to resolve some of the challenges to why they wanted to do it in the first place?
Yes. Okay. So I'll answer that with three things. The first one is because we had such a close relationship with them after the project ended, we came back every year. We could keep kind of like metric on the impact that was generated, which is not something we have with all of our other projects. And in fact, we did submit the West Coast TAS project to DNAD, but you know how DNAD works with like, this project must come out from this time to this time. It kind of made us question that any other project that we do for place branding, the impact is, it's so soon after that you can't possibly measure the impact of a region by the definitions of, you know, design awards, and in a way kind of made us question how awards are kind of so inward looking and not really long lasting type of impact. That's another story for another conversation. But with that in mind, we had a close look at one of the things that you mentioned were that kind of the pride, but also a compelling narrative for the West Coast to be able to sell themselves. They're constantly fighting other regions for federal or state grants, and in doing so, they have managed to, like following the brand, they've managed to acquire 3 significant brand grants. One of 20 million to build the first mountain bike area of the region, because they have incredible mountain to do so, and mountain biking was just taking off in Tassie, so they got that. I think one of the best ones for me was what to do with that area that was so damaged by the mining. Has always been like, in order to regenerate that land, you need a lot of cash, you need a lot of years, and you need a lot of scientists investing. You won't get that initially with any funding. So what they managed to do was quite clever as well. They convinced Screen Australia and earned a grant to be able to use the area as it is to film sci-fi movies, because as I said, it does look like Mars once you're there. So that they got a grant, and the one thing they had to do in order to the grant's happening next year is to build. So they have the set, but in order to build the sets, they need like an equivalent of a Bunnings. It's like the place where you buy wood and whatnot. So they are partnering with the closest town out of the West Coast to expand that Bunnings to be able to have hotels, the set building, and that. And yeah, they managed to get that grant. But I think the third one for me was on my final visit. So we moved to Tasmania after we fell in love with the region. So my husband and I moved from Sydney to Tassie. But on my final trip, I saw kind of like a rocking chair made out of incredible timber. And I was like, oh, I have a little one at home. I want to take this. I want to buy it. I found the guy that sold it, and I was like, how much for the plain timber thing? And he kind of looks at me and he's like, $50. And I'm like, I know that's not $50. It's like, it's not even the material itself is $50. I'm like, I tell me I'll pay you what it's worth. And then he looks at me, he's like, you don't know how much you've done for this region. And then just like, I will only accept $50. And this is a person that has never met me. He's never met me. I never had him in any of my sessions. But when I don't know, that for me was like, I went back and I cherished that airplane rocking chair so much, because that's it. Like, you do have an impact, maybe even in ways that we can't measure just yet, you know. So yeah, so those are the measuring impacts that we have. The ones that we're paying attention to are money.
I was just going to actually sort of hearing that speak to the sort of question you sort of posed towards the end around the kind of the idea of like, can you scale place branding up to sort of the national point? But I wonder, you know, based on the sort of like power of that example in terms of the person that said how much you've done for them, their sort of like area. I wonder if it's more about the sort of local identities being brought more to the service creates a stronger national identity in a way, rather than that sort of like homogenous with this one thing in a way.
Yeah. Yes. And ultimately the nation brands, unfortunately, are less about the people they're meant to represent and more about attracting people from outside, right? So that's why they go with like that generic statement of, old mate with a kangaroo. But yeah, I haven't been asked to do one, but I've theorized and have thought endlessly this year about what it would mean. And I mean, it's very courageous for a company to even embark on such a journey.
Yeah. I thought you were going to bring it full circle and go, this is my idea for rebranding.
I do have ideas. They're not really ready yet.
Thank you.
Question.
Yeah, go for it.
There's a part. Well, everything was wonderful, but there's a part of me that filled me with most angst, which was when you basically left pieces of paper with your concepts on and get lots of people to leave you feedback. When you're in a situation like that, how do you is it kind of like the rule of averages that you're trying to group together the kind of like the different corresponding responses to be able to kind of navigate where you go next? Like how do you go through a process like that when there's so many different individual opinions?
At the end of the day, you know what? A lot of the opinions are, we regroup them. Yes, for sure. A lot of the opinions are similar. So you have a lot of comments. You have comments around taste, and those are very subjective, about colors or graphic elements and whatnot. And we can't really do much about them, but listen, inquire why it doesn't feel right. So it's like if someone dislikes the color because it dislikes the color, that's nothing. There's nothing we can do there. But you can inquire if the color feels somehow just not right. And at times once we get the feedback, we gather it in groups and we question the ones that we don't have any information on. We leave the ones that are a little bit more superficial, just kind of left. And we go back. We're like, is this what you mean? This is all the feedback that we got back. We kind of play back the brief to see if that kind of works for them. But as I said, it was a learning curve, because typically when you get feedback from, I don't know, your first brand concept presentation, you'll get a feedback and you get, please regroup the feedback in one document. Thank you. And this one is our job to get all of that feedback together and kind of make some sense. I'd probably also say that even though the two concepts come from like the same brand idea, we make them typically very different. Like we try to push them apart so that we get a sense of almost like testing them. Would they go as far as, here, or is this? And in the end, we kind of know that it will be a mix mash of both. And we almost always have it formed in our head, but we use the opportunity to test it, before. But it's a very long process. One that rarely costed properly, by the way.
I was just saying, I love the way that I don't know whether you apply this to all of your place branding stuff, but particularly with the West Tasmanian one, the ability to give them ownership over how they use it for themselves was such a smart idea. I don't know whether that was ever something that was asked of you, or whether you came up with that as part of how you thought about, instilling it with them, but it just seems like totally logical in a way.
It's not something that we can do with all place branding projects, and I think that's a shame. A lot of place branding projects come from, like, the West Coast in particular, it kind of struggled for many reasons that I mentioned. Some place branding projects come from just councils need to merge, so it's like all of a sudden two distinct councils become one, so try to find some sort of identity. Others come from, it's the council brand that needs a place brand, so it's not going to get given to the communities, and other councils don't want the communities, or the assets are built to be kind of open source, but there's a paywall, so it's like you need to be part of this, and it's like no, they don't. But every council is kind of has their own sets of rules and whatnot, and we encourage the best way, which is the West Coast approach, and they all start wanting that. But sometimes they're like, oh, what does that mean? That, but what if someone uses our brand and does something awful? And it's like, well, that's just how it is, you know, like you can control, but yeah, that release of control is something that not every council is equipped for, not in terms of like people that they have, or so I think the West Coast is quite unique in that regard. There's a few others that we've done that are like that, but yeah, every place branding project is very, very different.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I guess, just knowing what some of those more rural Australian, quite insular towns can be like. Like I've got family from Rockhampton and like rural Queensland, and it's a funny one. This is going to not be a well-formed question at all, Joe. Sorry. It's a funny one because it's like there's that part of me that understands why they are the way they are and why they might have some opinions, and there's that other part of me that I don't want to understand. I don't want to hear it. Do you think with West Coast in particular, when the council approached you, did you come in with like quite preconceived ideas of what you were going to be hearing from the people there? Or
I probably also say a lot of Australian. Yeah, no, I think a lot of the Australians in our team also did not understand the complexities of what happened to the Indigenous communities in Tasmania, and kind of it's a very dark history, but it's not history. It's not so long ago, and for starters, a lot of Australian friends believe that the Indigenous community of Tasmania is non-existent, like they're no longer there, that they've been wiped out, and that's false. The Aboriginal community of Tasmania is there and thriving. So it's almost like, what happened? And they don't teach that at schools and all these things. So it's like, I guess that's why I was saying that being a Colombian was an asset for many of these hard conversations, because I'm not expected to know this. I'm also genuinely curious as to what's happening, and I'm asking probably, silly questions that Australians wouldn't typically. They kind of tiptoe around a lot of subjects, and the Indigenous community is definitely one of that people tend to navigate quite clumsily. And I feel like, yeah, our asset of not being from there was that. But no, I feel like I didn't have any expectations. I didn't have any preconceived notion of what I'd be hearing. I did encounter people that were completely different to me, and I had to like just keep reminding myself that I'm here to listen and I'm not here to pass judgment or try to convince them, yeah. And that was an exercise of, I don't know if it's empathy or I don't know what it was, but I was like, I'm here to absorb and I'm here to learn, and I don't need to agree with this person to be able to build a story. Yeah. Terrifying.
What was really interesting, the difference between what you did for West Tasmania and Derwent Valley was like so different. But I love the fact that you were able to bring through the fact that they could basically tell these really exaggerated stories that they really believe in. Yeah, and that became like the center point of the branding in a way. And it's so good. That's such a good idea for us. Yeah,
I know.
I think what you were talking a lot about is that actually, like, through the work of the exploration, whether it's the West Tasmanian one or Derwent Valley, you have to kind of get to that authenticity. Otherwise, it doesn't have the probably impact or the connection to the people that are actually going to live in that area. So it's really interesting how distinct those two were. How far apart they are in actual distance?
They actually touch each other at the south. So the Derwent Valley is quite a big region as well. And the national park, or the national park that I said on the west coast of Tassie, is part of the national park of Darwin Valley. So they do touch, they are neighboring, but from Queenstown, which is the main city in west coast, to Derwent, probably be like a 4-hour drive.
Really that far though to fit? It's essentially. Obviously, the geography plays such a massive role in that, I imagine, as you were sort of saying. But that's like from here to like.
It was less than to Newcastle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you probably would, to be fair though, you probably would get that distinctiveness between those two areas. But yeah, it's amazing how that comes through so strongly.
Yeah.
Right, flight.
I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Tassie's not huge. From like Hobart to Launceston, it's like a 3.5-hour drive.
Yeah. So it's like Hobart is in the middle of Tasmania, and then Loney's in the north, and that's like a 2.5-hour drive. If you go from Hobart, from Loney to the south, it's also, I mean, it's kind of straight, but then you have windy roads, you have mountains. So yeah. But I remember being in England, and we were in Aberdeen, and kind of driving to London, like 7-day drive, and people were like, "What do you mean you're gonna drive to London from Aberdeen?" Yeah. I was like, well, that's our holiday. But they were in Australia, the distances are so big that when you kind of change that and put it in England, they're like, "What do you mean you're driving for 5 hours?" And it's like, so yeah.
I flew.
I don't quite know how I was going to word it, but I think what was really interesting was obviously, I think, looking at the place branding, as you were saying, like the way you create so bespokely and uniquely for each place, and there's real authenticity, and it feels very human. It doesn't feel very digital, which is really nice, especially, I guess, the place. And I think a lot of design work is shifting to something that feels very synthetic or sort of, I guess, very digital. How much of that sense of feeling do you bring into work that isn't specifically place orientated? Like, is that something as a practice or a person you want to integrate into your work wholeheartedly? Because I think it was really beautiful.
Yeah, this is a conversation I've had a lot with the designers at For the People, because there's a lot of kind of things that are kind of going in my mind right now. But one is, in place branding, you really can't control much. You can control, but you can't. You're bringing those stories out, and we're, as much as we're trying to find what makes the place unique, you're also trying to find that visual language that resonates with them, right? And that typically will be, I think someone mentioned the word ancestral when seeing some of this work. It's just like, it's rooted in kind of its warmth. And so I feel like it's maybe visually the opposite of synthetic or techie or, or all of that. But yeah, I feel like that just comes from the place branding projects. However, in the rest of our work, there is more room to explore that, especially with, tech companies, or really any company nowadays that uses technology in any way or form. Then it's true to them. It's true to what makes the company. So then you can borrow kind of those elements a bit more. But I feel like For the People has a portfolio that is very colorful, is very, I don't know, and that might be the designers, that might be the people that are in the projects as much as the clients that we get. Who knows? I can't compare with the designers I don't have, but I feel like I can think of one or two that always try to take it to more of a minimalist approach and whatnot, and it always ends up being mixed with color and joy. And yeah, and you know what, the reason why I'm kind of mumbling is because in the back of my mind I also feel that we have a I have very strong opinions over, I studied in Paris, and I was educated with the design aesthetics of European movements and whatnot. And I didn't really know much about Latin American design when I studied. I don't even think I had, we all talk about representation and all of that, but it wasn't really something I had growing up. And I'd go back to Colombia and I'd see this kind of visual explosion of things in the street, but in my way, because I was formed kind of the European way, I always thought about it as amateurish or as like street and not necessarily design. And it wasn't until years later where I was like, actually, it's a shame, because there is so much joy in what already exists in the culture and in the music and in the design elements and whatnot. So I think I've come to terms with fully embracing that, and maybe perhaps there's a narrative of bringing that back into the work. So that's why I'm like, I'm conflicted in how to answer that question, because I am coming to terms with a lot of things about my design career as well.
Amazing, thank you so much.
Can I ask one really short, simple question? Do you often now that you've done so many like place branding projects, do you quite often find when you go to different locations, your mind is sort of like dialed into that, so you're looking at things and seeing like the opportunity almost?
Yes, it's so annoying.
Yeah.
It's like
yeah, can't
yes,
see it
yeah.
now. Yeah, cool.
Awesome. I think we'll probably wrap up.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's so interesting.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
I'll chat to you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye everyone.